You're listening to the Fan2Fan Podcast, and on this episode, we're celebrating the 25-year anniversary of the 1998 movie, Blade. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan2Fan Podcast. I'm one of the hosts, Bernie Gonzalez, and on this episode, we're talking about the 25-year anniversary of Blade.
His name strikes fear in his enemies.
It's open season on all Night Stalkers.
Half human.
All our strengths.
Half immortal.
None of our weaknesses.
He is the ultimate weapon in the war against evil.
Tonight, the age of man comes to an end.
I don't see it that way.
Wesley Snipes. Stephen Dorff. Blade. Rated R.
Movie came out back on August 19th of 1998. Hard to believe because I remember watching this movie in theaters. I remember the impact of this movie well before we knew the acronym MCU, before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's a movie that's ahead of its time. It's a product of its time. And a few years ago, my buddy Andre and I took the time to talk about Blade. So we're re-releasing the episode to commemorate this 25-year anniversary of the movie. And in our conversation, Dre and I talk about the movie's impact, special effects, its legacy, its impact on comics, on cosplay, on culture, and so much more. Here we go. This is your host, Bertie Gonzalez, and I'm here with my boy, Andre Walker.
What's up, B?
So today we are going to be talking about Blade. That's right, everyone's favorite vampire hunter and slayer, Blade the Daywalker. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has been going full steam. Dre is a big fan of Blade.
Yeah, as soon as the movie came out, it really hit me. It's one of the first successful, forget Marvel movies, it's one of the first successful superhero movies to come out in a long time. So it has a very special place in my heart.
And Blade was really kind of the forgotten son, one of the first that really started the momentum on all of this stuff. So I figured talk about a few of the things from the movie. Came out back in 1998. This was a big year for movies. The Big Lebowski, There's Something About Mary. Adam Sandler had Waterboy and The Wedding Planner. It was a year of small screen to big screen, X-Files, Lost in Space, and The Avengers. It was a year of sequels, Lethal Weapon 4, Babe, Pig in the City, Blues Brothers 2000. Also the year of the continued teen slasher popularity with The Faculty, I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, Urban Legend, a number of future cult classics, Dark City, Gods and Monsters, and Apt Pupil. And then there was kind of like the year of the dual movies, Saving Private Ryan, Thin Red Line, Ants, A Bug's Life. You had Armageddon, Deep Impact. And then there was obviously Godzilla. You had American History X and Shakespeare in Love. That is a pretty big lineup of movies.
Yeah, some hits in there, some misses, some cult classics in there.
But going back to Blade, so Blade falls in 1998 with all these movies that have been released. It's rated R, released by New Line Cinema and Marvel Entertainment. Comes out the same weekend as 54, Dead Man on Campus, and then Dance With Me, movie with Richard Gere. So look at that competition.
Yeah, I kind of remember Dance With Me. There are other movies, no clue.
54?
Is that Studio 54? Is that the one?
Yeah, Studio 54.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know of the movie, but I've never seen the movie.
So then in all this, Blade comes out. So it's August. Blade is released. It's produced on a budget of $45 million, and it does okay overall. So Box Office Mojo tells us that the domestic gross was $70 million foreign and $61 million domestic. So overall, worldwide, makes $131 million. On a budget of 45. Pretty good.
That's really good.
So Marvel had developed the film. They started back in 1992, and they were looking at rapper / actor LL Cool J, who was interested in playing the lead role, but eventually was set up at New Line Cinema. David Goyer wrote the script, and originally they wanted to do something as a spoof. So that's what I was able to find as far as my research. My uninformed fandom tells me when they say they wanted to do it something as a spoof, I'm going to guess it was probably going to be in the vein of like black exploitation, right?
That has to be what they were thinking about doing. If you look at the character in the books, he kind of had the afro and the leather jacket, so he
was a product of his time. Wesley Snipes is attached to star, so the executives, they really felt that there were only a few people that could play the role, including Snipes. The other two were Denzel Washington and Lawrence Fishburne, but David Goyer, the writer, always felt that the eventual Blade should be Wesley Snipes. Mm-hmm. Mark Singer, I know him very much from the series, which was a great fan favorite for me. But he was also the Beastmaster.
Another classic.
So he was originally the choice for Whistler, but that wound up going to Chris Christopherson, who became Abraham Whistler. Jet Li was offered the role of Deacon Frost, but instead he went to Lethal Weapon 4. So instead it was played by Stephen Dorff, who became the upstart vampire leader. Then you have Stan Lee, who has now had a track record of cameos in all the Marvel Cinematic movies. And he originally was going to have a cameo, but it was cut from the film. He was actually going to play one of the cops that comes into the Blood Club right in the beginning after the aftermath, and he discovers Quinn's body on fire.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that I think about like all the Stan Lee cameos in the Marvel movies now. They pretty much put Stan Lee in it, so it's kind of funny to think of Stan Lee had a cameo way back before it was a popular thing to do.
And Stephen Norrington, who was the director, we'll talk about him in a little bit. He actually wanted originally Danny Trejo to play Quinn. So right before we started recording, we're actually talking about Danny Trejo. And you may know him as Machete. You may know him as the guy from, well, you were talking about him in Runaway Train, which was his first role.
Yeah.
So
he had spent some time in prison, and he had got out because of heroin. And
this is real prison. This is real heroin.
San Quentin prison. He had rehabilitated himself, and he became an advocate, advisor for people who are hooked on drugs. And one actor who was hooked on heroin and was trying to kick the habit was on the set of Runaway Train, and he asked Danny Trejo to come down there to help him kick his habit because he was feeling, that he was going to break his,
Yeah, just kind of get back into it.
Yeah. So, and Danny Trejo came down to the set, and another former prisoner from San Quentin who had written a book about his life and became a best-selling novelist, recognized him and told the director that this guy would be great to be in the movie. And they asked him if he wanted to be an extra, and he was like, "An extra what? An extra." He didn't know anything about acting or anything. But if you know, Runaway Train is a movie about criminals, and they wanted somebody who could look like a criminal. And if anybody who's seen Danny Trejo, especially young Danny Trejo, knows he can do a pretty good looking criminal. So
that's like you were saying, those are just not tattoos.
Yeah, those are prison tattoos he has. So that's how he got his start. And it would have been an interesting take to see him play the villain in the movie. I don't know how he would have came off. Now we know Danny Trejo. He's a really great guy, really great actor. Now that we see him have more depth, but back then he was pretty one note. So it would have been really pretty weird to see him, in Blaze sort of a silent badass. And
because you wonder, would they have let him speak in the role?
Exactly.
Would he would have just been kind of like the silent, bulky guy with the tattoos? Because I'm sure they would have had him take his shirt off for every scene just to showcase the tattoos.
Yeah, exactly. That's his trademark. And if you see what Stephen Dorff did, Stephen Dorff kind of played not like a Joker, but with Blade being sort of more stoic, he played it with a little bit more cockiness, a little bit more bravado. So it kind of worked out better, the whole Batman Joker motif, where you have one guy who's stoic and the other guy's a little bit more of a smart mouth. So
exactly. So that was Quinn, and that was played by Donald Logue, who's been in just about everything. I know he was in he's currently in Gotham. But I forget, Terriers?
Yeah.
That was the show that he was in that maybe lasted one season, 12 episodes.
Yeah.
It was a good show.
Yeah, I know he was really good in that. He's actually was in Ghost Rider.
Yeah, he was in the show Vikings.
Yeah, he's got a pretty good track record as being a fan favorite type of cult actor, but yeah.
A few other name actors in there. Udo Kerr, he was the head of the House of Erebus. So the way they set it up in the movie, there are different houses for the vampires, and he was the representative for one of them. Sana Lathan, she played Vanessa Brooks, who was Blade's mother, who would eventually become Frost's lover. And then you also had Tracy Lords, who was Raquel. She was a seductive vampire that kind of leads the guy in the beginning to the blood rave. Putting this all together was director Stephen Norrington. I know I've heard stuff about him. I'm sure you've heard stuff about him. So Stephen Norrington, he started working in film originally as a special effects artist on the movie Aliens. His debut as a director was in 1994 in a movie titled Death Machine. And I don't know if you remember, we actually saw this during one of our bad movie nights. We used to have a bad movie night. Andre, myself, a friend of mine named Chris, a friend of mine named Steve, and we would all get together and we would try to each bring a bad movie and see who would bring the worst movie that evening. And then that person would win some sort of fake award or pride.
For no apparent reason.
No reason. This is in the time when there were Hollywood videos and blockbusters. So we had a plethora of movies to choose from. And you had everything from full moon movies to movies that were made literally on VHS that were just coming out, that we could pick and sit down and torture ourselves for a nice, fun Friday night or Saturday night. And we're talking 3, sometimes 4 movies back to back to back to back. That's where we discovered Feeders, Jack Frost 2, The Clown at Midnight, and Death Machine. So Death Machine's released in 1994, and that gets him a little bit of notoriety because it was made on the cheap, but it had a good visual style, and that would bring him to Blade. After Blade, he went on to direct The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. That has its own story as far as his relationship with the actor Sean Connery, and because of that, Sean Connery announced that he would never act again. Stephen Norrington announced that he would never direct again, but then he changed his mind later, and he was attached to Ghost Rider, Freddy vs. Jason, Clash of the Titans remake that eventually went to Louis Lederer, and the Crow reboot that has not happened. But Stephen Norrington, on his own, quite the story.
Yeah, I actually would like to see what he would do, what he would have done with some other movies in that same genre, like maybe not The Crow, but maybe if he would have got a shot at Hellboy before Guillermo did, or he definitely had a good visual style, a good tone with Blade, and it would have been interesting to see him maybe take on some more characters of that darker, more R-rated tone to see what he would have did with different movies. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was just out of his depth. It was, especially with what they wanted to do with the movie. They were trying to make it, the X-Men had came out, and they were trying to make the League.
Because even eventually they kind of went away from calling it League, and they just called it LXG.
LXG, they were trying to make it a
got an X in the title.
Yeah, so it wasn't his thing. I think he was more suited for more dark, gritty, R-rated type movies, and LXG was like PG-13, and so I would really wish he would have did a couple of more movies before he hung it up and see what kind of a director he could have been. Right. Now it might be too late, but I wish he would have continued.
And it's funny because I was researching to find out anything about him. There's literally nothing. Outside of these movies where
I think he did some makeup work. I think he did some more makeup work. After that, he did some makeup work on some other projects, and he did some character designs. I saw that he did some character designs from some other people's movies and stuff like that. He literally just disappeared. And he's pretty much like the godfather of the Marvel movement with the first successful superhero movie of modern times.
He was part of that wave of David Fincher type directors. Mm-hmm. They had a very visual style to them. Mm-hmm. And ironically enough, David Fincher was actually attached to direct Blade with New Line Cinema before he moved on and eventually directed Seven. So that would have been interesting too. But Stephen Norrington, for sure, good visual style. That intro scene in Blade, incredibly memorable. Classic. It's like this mishmash of like intensity and then the music and the techno. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's part of what made Blade very unique amongst a lot of things. But
it's totally a 90s movie. I mean, everybody always talk about the 90s, how it was like loud and fast paced and, everything was so over the top type of thing. And Blade was totally a 90s style movie. Stephen Norrington really brought that out in that opening intro scene. That's totally a 90s vibe. You see that movie, this movie probably came out in the 90s.
You always remember the music.
Yeah. That's classic.
So the Blood Rave?
Yeah.
The
Bloodbath.
The Bloodbath. And I remember, so at the time, I was working at Best Buy with you.
Yeah.
And the movie came out on DVD. Mm-hmm. You work at Best Buy, that means you end up eventually at some point buying some decent speakers for your surround system. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the first movies where I popped in the DVD and you could hear his blade boomerang.
Yeah.
As he throws it around and it goes from front speaker to back left speaker to back right speaker, back to the front and to the center. It was just like, oh, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, we probably get to the DVD sales a little bit later, but it was definitely one of those things that when DVD first popped out, that it was a big must-get movie for a lot of DVD fans out there who wanted to, because DVD had just started around that time, I believe, and it wasn't really that big, and there was a very small selection, and Blade was one of those movies that if you had to get a DVD, Blade was one of the DVDs you want to have in your collection because it was a pretty solid movie, especially if you want to show off your surround sound.
Yes.
When surround sound really started to blow up in the 90s, especially when I was working at Best Buy.
The THX, the
Dolby Digital, Dolby Pro Logic, 5.1, all that. We wanted to get the Blade movie in there because it had that, and it had that one other scene where Blade, he goes and interviews the one large Jabba the Hutt vampire. And there was a scene where he puts gel around the door and he blows up the door. And I think somebody who I worked with at Best Buy who knows about this said that scene, the explosion, at that time was one of like the highest recorded sounds for digital sound at the time. Because when you put that on your surround sound, it was almost piercing. I mean, I literally had to, even no matter where I had
The subwoofer's working a little extra.
I had to turn it down. Even if I had it low, I would turn it a little bit lower.
Yeah.
Because that scene was just explosive. Best sound test you could have for Ace. And it became a sound test where most people used in when they tested in surround sounds and surround sounds around the country. That scene was the scene that they used to show people how the speakers work. So that's one thing that Blade, dubiously, if you want to say it, was that's a demo for surround sound in the 90s.
Remember, you can find the Fan2Fan Podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan2Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN. On Instagram, at Fan2Fan Podcast. Or on Twitter, at Fan2Fan Podcast. We'd love to hear from you, so send a message and let us know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
So let me go back here a bit more personal. When do you remember seeing Blade for the first time?
Yeah, I've always been a big comic book fan, and I've always been very disappointed in comic book movies up until that point. And I remember a couple of guys said they were going to go see Blade, and I saw the commercials and stuff, and I was like, it's a character that I really didn't know too much about at the time, and it was R-rated, which was a death knell for superhero movies. I mean, superheroes, you don't make R-rated superhero movies, not from R-rated superheroes based on B characters. And I remember going to see it, and from the opening, like we talked about, that opening scene, everybody just grabs you in. Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes is one of those actors who, when I see him in other movies, I see him as Wesley Snipes. In this movie, he was Blade.
Yes.
Every time I see the movie, he's not Wesley Snipes. He is Blade. The scene where the crowd walks away, and I remember the thing that really was cool was when they walked away and they were whispering something. And I was like, what are they saying? They said, what did they say? Like, what did they say? And I listened to like Daywalker, and I was like, Daywalker? Oh, because he can walk in the sunlight. They called him the Daywalker. And I thought that was such a cool name. And from there on, I was hooked on the movie. They had me all the way through. The action sequences were great. I remember looking at my brother like, oh man, I hope this movie ends well. I hope this movie ends well, because right now I'm loving it. And then the big fight scene at the end with Deacon Frost, when he with
the Mangra,
the Mangra,
yep.
And he goes and gets gets the vest and gets the sword, and I was like, okay, we have a winner.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Line.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
And from now on, I've been a huge fan of Blade, and I've been looking out. And the thing you can always tell with a really good movie, especially a movie based on a superhero, is if they change the comic to reflect the movie. They did it with Superman when Christopher Reeves came out, and Superman became a little bit more like, they drew him a little bit more like Christopher Reeves in the books because the movie was so popular. With Blade, they totally changed the background of Blade's character to match the background of the movie.
And his comics, so like it was released in 1993. It was Marv Wolfman, Gene Colan, Tomb of Dracula #10. Mm-hmm. That 70s kind of, I mean, it's like they created him so that he could fight bad guys like Dracula. Mm-hmm. But there was a loss of interest in that. So eventually in like the 90s, the way we probably know him now is because they really put him together with other Marvel horror supernatural characters, Ghost Rider, Morbius, the Living Vampire, Hannibal King, the Night Stalkers. But the original one, I mean, it really is a product of the 70s. Mm-hmm. And then you see what they did with it in 1998. I mean, he really is kind of like the first modern superhero.
Mm-hmm. I think the thing that really helped Blade a lot was the fact that he was this 1970s, black exploitation type character, which meant that he really didn't have a loyal fan base. I mean, he was a B character, so it gave the writer and the director the freedom to do what they wanted to do with them, and they weren't bound by anything, so they just threw.
Yeah, no one knew anything about him, so you couldn't say that's different from the comic. Mm-hmm. I mean, originally he wasn't even a daywalker.
Yeah, he was a human.
Yeah, he was a human who was immune to being turned into a vampire. He didn't have the super speed or the strength that he had in the movie. Mm-hmm. He pretty much just relied on his wits, and then eventually he gets bitten by Morbius, who really ends up becoming more of a Spider-Man villain. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, for this part, so he gets bitten by the living vampire Morbius. So by the time he appears in the movie, he's got all these powers. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, fans and the general public alike don't even know who Blade is, let alone what his history is. Yeah. So you have Wesley Snipes playing him, and like you said, he becomes Blade. Mm-hmm. And it's more of this kind of like silent warrior, the samurai that happens to fight vampires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did a really good job of blending that whole samurai motif around Blade too. I think that was one of David Goyer's things. He mentioned somewhere in an interview I read somewhere that he was thinking of the lone Ronin samurai type character, and it really comes across with Blade. And the thing too with Wesley Snipes' Blade, he's one of those classic stoic characters who doesn't say a lot, but he gets a lot about his presence, his body movement, the way he stands, the way he sits, the way he stares. It gives you a lot of emotion just by looking at that alone. He gives a lot of personality in that, and just his small words and big performances and big gestures that really give the character his own persona.
And it's martial arts. You would think like Lawrence Fishburne, Denzel Washington, they might have been able to pull him off. You know, they are big names in their own right. I think the same year that Blade came out, I'm pretty certain that was also the same year Fallen came out. Mm-hmm. And you have to remember, like, this is a few years before 2000, before Y2K. Mm-hmm. And there was this kind of like weird movement towards supernatural movies. Mm-hmm. And maybe it happens, you know, right before something big happens, right? You know, like we're trying to search for answers and you see more supernatural movies and you tend to see things like that. So, you know, Blade was just at a good time, but it was very different from everything else around it, especially when you think about in the past, because in 1997, that was the release of Batman and Robin.
Yes.
Steel, mm-hmm. and Spawn. Mm-hmm. And Mike DeLuca, who was of New Line Cinema, actually produced Steel and Spawn. So you think between those two not necessarily well-known movies, he would have said, all right, I'm done with superhero movies. But they from the beginning, considering that originally they wanted to do it a spoof, they decided to start navigating it to do something that could be different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. Like when I said when the movie first came out, I didn't have high hopes for the movie because of that long list of movies and that's just in the 90s, you know what I mean? It's a lot more movies that we could talk about that was just huge disappointments to fans, but big movies, small movies that were just a huge disappointment. And for the movie to come out with a barely D-list character, if we want to call him D-list, if there's a Z, and then you slap on the R rating onto the character, if you were in my generation, you looked at that, there's nothing that says that movie should be as good as it was.
Yes.
So I think that's another reason why I like the movie, because it was such a surprise to me how much I liked the movie and how well it was done. You know, it was a good blend of action, cool story. It was just a really good movie. And I remember coming out going, wow, if every movie could be like this, if every superhero movie could be like this, then we got something going. It took a while for them to get going in the modern day era. But like we've talked about, reason why we do this podcast, Blade is really the forgotten Marvel success story. Before Spider-Man, before the X-Men movies came out, Blade was the first one that showed people that Marvel characters can be successful, that you can have a successful superhero movie.
You've got Blade that becomes the first Marvel box office success, right? Mm-hmm. But it's following in the wake of movies like Howard the Duck. Up to that point, it's not like they had a lot of hits on their hands. I mean, they had Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., starring David Hasselhoff. You still didn't have Spider-Man and X-Men in the versions they have now. You had Punisher with Dolph Lundgren. Blade ends up becoming this, not necessarily just superhero, but this hybrid of action, vampire, supernatural, and not in a campy way either. Mm-hmm. Not like Batman and Robin, not in this kind of neo-noir of like The Shadow or The Phantom. Mm-hmm. Here's this hip-hop culture, here's this techno soundtrack, here's this very bloody, no-hold-barred with decent digital effects for the time.
Mm-hmm. At the time, yeah.
It's pretty impressive that, you know, it's kind of like they said, you know what, this is what we feel a superhero movie could be, because it doesn't have any of the weight of the Hulk or Spider-Man or Captain America, where people have expectations. I feel like I know in my head how a Captain America movie should flow, how an actor playing Captain America should be. But at that time, if you told me, oh, Wesley Snipes is playing Blade, I'd probably ask you, who's Blade? And even as a fanboy, I knew of him a little bit through Night Stalkers, but just be like, oh, that Blade? Mm-hmm. That guy's getting a movie before the Hulk, before Captain America, before Wolverine. Exactly. You know, it's like, oh, okay, so that's where Marvel's going. Interesting.
I think that one of the things, too, I can't really speak for David Goyer because I don't know what he was thinking, but for me, looking at it, I think another reason why Blade was so successful was that if you took the Marvel name off of it, it would just be a really cool action movie. I think going into it, I think David Goyer, like I said, I can't really speak for him because I haven't read this anywhere, but it just felt like they were trying to make a really cool, kick-ass action movie that happened to be about a Marvel character. Because it really didn't play like any Marvel at the time. I mean, like I said, if you go down that list of those movies, I mean, how many of those movies were R-rated? I mean, Spawn is an R-rated comic book character, but the movie was PG-13.
Exactly.
So they didn't do R-rated movies. So the fact that David Goyer said, the heck with it, I'm just going to treat this like we're doing a really cool action movie that just so happens to be about a Marvel character. And it really helped the character and helped the movie find its footing, because it didn't have to be, okay, we're a comic book movie, so that means that we have to pull punches. We can't have him cut people. We can't have him curse. We can't have him do certain things because, hey, it's a comic book movie. Since David Goyer went with the notion that, hey, this is a action movie. You know, this is a hard R action movie. It gave them a little more freedom. And the fact that Blade was, like I say, a Z-list character, that it gave them freedom to do it with the Blade character. Marvel didn't have to push back and say, hey, we don't want you to really do that with this character, because if the movie bombed, who cares? It was Blade. And luckily the movie was a success and started a whole entire new Blade franchise and everything.
Yeah, so I remember watching it. It was the night it came out, opening night. It was on a Friday, and I just remember going into the theater without any expectations. I didn't know anything about the movie, who Stephen Norrington was, or anything else, and just thinking, like right after that beginning rape scene, like this is pretty intense. Never seen anything like this. It's more than just a superhero movie. This is just, like you said, it's like they made a good movie that just happened to star a character from Marvel, but ultimately they could have called him something else. They could have called him Steak instead of Blade, you know, and he would have had a bunch of wooden stakes on him, and although that might have been a terrible name, but still, complete departure from other vampire type lore too. And you think like Buffy, and that was released in, I want to say it was 92, and the kind of like complete spoof on vampire culture. And Blade, you know, kind of goes in this different way from the typical Nosferatu, the Universal movie monsters, like the Hammer Dracula films, stuff like Salem's Lot Monster Squad, where they had a very traditional kind of like gothic Dracula, Frank Ford Coppola's Dracula, the Lost Boys, which had kind of like this weird punk combination, but still, for the most part, they were traditional vampires, right? Yeah. Or even Interview with a Vampire, which had the romanticized Anne Rice version of it. And then you have Blade coming out with this kind of reinvented image of what a vampire is.
And that's a key thing too that you mentioned, that this was before the oversaturation with vampires. I mean, you mentioned a couple of vampires movies like Interview with Vampire and Lost Boys, but those were mostly one-offs. So a movie would come out in like 3, 4, 5 years, another movie would come out with a vampire in it, and 3, 4, 5 years, another movie would come out with a vampire in it. And this was before people were actually, you know, kind of oversaturated with the Twilight. And this was early. So this was actually pretty new, you know, a vampire superhero that nobody thought about doing, a hero who was actually a vampire. Seeing that on screen was actually made Blade stand out too, because vampires are always portrayed negatively in movies. And to see a vampire that was a hero was really cool. And it was at a time where vampires were still in that kind of a cool range, where people still really liked vampires, and the vampire lore was really interesting. And if Blade was created today, it probably would be, you know, you probably roll your eyes like, oh, another vampire movie. You know, we already had the Underworld franchise, we already had Twilight, and we've already had so many other franchises with supernatural characters we had True Blood, the TV series with vampires in it. You know, vampires have become oversaturated, so now they're not unique anymore. They're not special. But when Blade came out, it was something totally different, which actually helped him, again, establish himself as a unique comic book character movie.
You wonder if movies like the Underworld series, Daybreakers with Ethan Hawke and stuff like that, movies that took the whole vampire mythology and kind of played with it a little bit, if those movies would have even been made if Blade wasn't successful. I mean, this is forgetting like the tone of the movie. Like The Matrix came out the year after in 99. Equilibrium, one of our favorites, came out in 2002. Another forgotten gem. But they all had that kind of visual tone, right? So those movies kind of have I don't know, I always go back to like there's the style to it, but then as far as like the action, it goes back to that John Woo balletic action combination of like slow motion, and that definitely stood the test of time, and that we continue to see in movies today, because we see like The Night Watch, the Russian film, and then Day Watch.
The guy who directed wanted.
That's right. Yeah, he's taken that kind of style, right? So that stood the test of time. But then you've got all this vampire lore that's out there. But nonetheless, it's like 1998, no one could have seen Blade come out in that type of iteration of a vampire.
Yeah, and I think that was another thing you kicked on too about with Blade and the Underworld franchise too. That Blade was, I mean, people always contribute The Matrix to the movie that really started the whole wire food, where Blade came out beforehand, and Blade really got the ball rolling with that sort of leather jacket, wire type of martial arts thing. It was the precursor to see characters fight like, I mean, Wesley Snipes did that capoeira. I probably mispronounced that. He did that capoeira style.
A Brazilian martial arts.
Brazilian martial arts, which gives you the kind of like swing and punch and kick in off 17 different directions at 17 different times. And it really gave Blade a unique style, and it really helped him define him as a character, because at the time, nobody had ever seen his fight style like that. There were no movies where people fought like Blade. Now, TV shows, you have TV shows now where characters use that wire food type of fighting style. But Blade was like the precursor to the whole action scenes that we see today. It's sort of the way Jason Bourne sort of started shaky cam. Blade sort of started the whole wire food. Even like a bad movies, like the Resident Evil movies, you could trace those movies can be always traced back to the original, the first Blade movie that came out. So that's another thing that Blade brought to the table that doesn't get a lot of credit for and should.
Speaking of not a lot of credit, Rotten Tomatoes, 55%. I was kind of surprised. I thought it would be much higher than that. Not necessarily maybe as a movie, but I would think that critics at the time would have seen it and, just kind of said, all right, for what it is, this is much better than what we expected.
I can see why critics, the 55%, it's really a cult, if you want to say fan film. Critics don't hate it, but they don't love it. They kind of put it in the middle. They actually like Blade 2 a lot more. They give it a little bit more credit. I actually like the first Blade way more than the second one, but Blade has really grown as a fan favorite film. That's the thing with Blade. You cannot go to a comic book convention and I see somebody dressed up as Blade. And that's another cultural thing that we could talk about that we have mentioned, that Blade was like the first popular, if any, African-American character out there.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I dressed up as Blade for one time at Halloween. It was the only time I ever dressed up, and I decided to dress up as Blade, and it just felt really cool to do, to actually have a character that I could dress up as, and I didn't have to, go too much lengths to get the costume on. And Blade became one of those characters that a lot of African Americans, felt proud of. There was a black character out there who was very popular, and you could dress up like him, and he was a hero. And to this day, I don't go to a convention.
And without a mask.
Without a mask. He didn't have to wear a mask. That's very key. He didn't have to wear a mask. He could be himself, and he could walk around, and you knew exactly who he was with the trench coat and the sunglasses and the sword in his back.
Yes.
You knew exactly who he used to be. Oh, look, that guy's Blade. Look, and there's another Blade. And to this day, I still see people dress up as Blade in costumes, and that was really important at the time, because they didn't really, they did the Spawn movie, and they did the Shaquille O'Neal movie with Steel, but I won't count that as a movie.
No, that's more of like a Shaquille O'Neal vehicle. They just said, all right, look, we've got a bunch of scripts.
Yeah. And now that Marvel and DC are making an effort to push to try to get more diversity in their movies, with Falcon and Nick Fury, and Blade was the first African-American, before Storm. Storm is probably the most well-known female African-American character out there. And right now, if you ask anybody, maybe now you'd probably say Nick Fury or Falcon, but Blade was, at the time, was standing alone on top of the mountain. So that's pretty big culturally if you think about it like that.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
If you're enjoying the Fan2Fan podcast, we'd love to hear from you, and we made it easy. Just go to speakpipe.com/fan2fan. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN, and you can send us a voicemail. You have 90 seconds to leave your message for Fan2Fan podcast. We love to hear our own voices, but honestly, we want to hear yours. So if you're a fan of Fan2Fan, visit speakpipe.com/fan2fan. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN. We hope to hear from you soon.
Back to the show.
And speaking of first, we kind of mentioned it a little earlier, the DVD thing. So it was one of the first DVDs that had a lot of special features.
Yes, it did.
Interviews, martial arts, montage, biographies, behind-the-scenes footage. It had a documentary on the design of Blade. It had the trailer, the kind of stuff that we kind of take for granted now, especially when you talk about a special release Blu-ray, because now we're in the era of Blu-rays, right? So the Blu-ray comes out, one disc may have the movie, the second disc may have all the features, but at that time, we're talking, 1999, 2000, one of the executives, one of the quotes I found where he talked about how the DVD sales actually superseded the box office.
Yeah.
So that means it made over 131 million in DVD sales, which is unprecedented. They kind of pioneered the idea of expecting special features in a movie, because you never really had that before.
Yeah, I mean DVD, and like I said, DVD had not taken off. That it was a format that people were still kind of shaky with. It wasn't a lot of content out there. Blade was like one of the first with the extra content. One of the cool things on there that we see on there now is alternate endings.
Yes.
I mean, Blade, the big feature on the Blade, if you haven't seen it, I'm pretty sure everybody's seen Blade and listen to
I
this
think we
podcast.
can go beyond spoiler alert.
Yeah. The ending scene, the original ending where Blade is, Blade comes out of the tunnels and fighting Deacon Frost and La Magra, and they see Morbius, another popular vampire character, or it would look like Morbius, but it was another Daywalker, and the rumor was that it was supposed to be Morbius, another Daywalker that Blade was supposed to fight. And I thought just seeing that was cool. I mean, nobody ever seen alternate endings. Whatever movie you see, that's the movie that you see.
Yes.
Even when we bought the VHS tape back in the day, they didn't put that on VHS tapes. It wasn't enough. You watched the movie and maybe a couple of trailers for future movies coming out. But when Blade came out, they have all the extra features, behind the scenes, alternate ending that was originally planned for Blade. It really, 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 really helped DVD sales because, and like you said, it really made other DVD people say, listen, they put that on this DVD. We have to put some of that stuff on here. And we take it for granted now, but Blade was the pioneer.
We're now part of a culture that likes to see how the hot dog is made. Mm-hmm. And we want to see behind the scenes features. We want to see interviews with the actors, with the creative staff, like the directors and everything else. You like a movie so much, you want to find out, how did they come up with that move? How did they come up with that ending? Hear from the actual actors, from the director, from the writer, because David Goyer has gone to do so much after this. I mean, if Stephen Norrington has kind of bowed out and decided to go ahead and go into exile, whether it's self-appointed or he's been blacklisted or whatever.
Exactly.
But David Goyer, I mean, he's done quite a few different things. Nolan Batman movies.
Exactly.
He directed a few movies on his own. I want to say it was Unborn. He did The Invisible, which was actually a decent movie. But yeah, I think he directed Blade and Blade Trinity. Yeah, after following Guillermo del Toro on Blade 2. So the DVD precedent that Blade set, forget as far as a movie, it just continues to talk about what it did. And then thinking about the future. So it ended on Blade 3, but we've heard so much about another Blade. Back in 2011, Joe Quesada, who's Marvel's, I think his chief creative officer or something like that, or chief editor, he talked about how the rights went back to Marvel. So we're talking back to 2011. In 2013, The Hollywood Reporter said that Marvel had a script for a new Blade feature. I don't think they've made it secret that they want to do something with the character, that they want to do something in film, because he's kind of gone on and off in comics. So like you said earlier, they reinvented Blade for the movie, and now that's the version of Blade we see in the comics. So if he comes back into the film world, it'd be interesting to see, now that we're talking in a film culture where we've already got 3 Spider-Mans, would they go back to a Wesley Snipes? Would they reinvent it? I remember reading that they were going to redo the comics where Blade kind of became the Whistler and his daughter became the new Daywalker. So they're in a world now in comics where they're changing everything. Would it make sense to change that? If you were going to do a Blade 4, are you starting him in the middle of this Marvel Cinematic Universe with Captain America, Thor, and everything else? Does he fit in this world? Or does he fit even in the next Netflix world with Daredevil and now Punisher, Jessica Jones?
Yeah, I think that's more way, because Marvel, Kevin Feige, the head of Marvel, has said ever since the success of Deadpool that they will not do a R-rated movie. You will not see a R-rated Marvel feature film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So that pretty niche right there at a future Blade movie. And
you wonder, is that them or is that Disney?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think Marvel is pretty protective of their brand as far as the cinematic universe. They're all about, they want to do controversial stories. They want to do challenging stories. They want to do complex stories. They'll push the envelope with Civil War. They'll push the envelope with the new Winter Soldier, and now with Civil War coming out. But they don't want to go too hard. They want to go Blade. But they have made it clear that they are willing to do that on the Netflix medium. And if anybody's seen the Punisher, Daredevil, anybody seen Jessica Jones, if anybody's seen the footage that they've been showing for that, that's pretty R. I mean, that's not like slightly R. That's some R-rated stuff in there. And I think there was a rumor going around, and I think it's maybe more fan created, that the next wave of Marvel Netflix shows may be going dip into the supernatural after Doctor Strange comes out and makes it. There's talk of maybe Ghost Rider, 'cause like we said, Ghost Rider rights have went back to Marvel. The Blade's rights has went back to Marvel. They've got Moon Knight sitting there, who's kind of a mix between supernatural and street. And there was a rumor floating around the internet that may be a way they may go with the next wave of Netflix TV shows. They may dip their toes in that supernatural, darker supernatural world. So there's definitely a chance for a new Blade TV series that way. I don't think they would go with Wesley Snipes. I mean, I think they would go with a younger Blade. So I think we're probably seeing our last turn as Wesley Snipes as Blade. But I don't think the character is done because of his popularity, because of what he means as far as diversity for Marvel, who's trying to establish themselves as more than just the one typical stereotypical character. He's too popular of a character, and he's got too big of a fan base for them not to try to do something with him.
So speaking of popularity, other places where Blade has made an appearance. Video game by Activision back in 2000.
I think I had that game.
Was it good?
No.
Okay. He was in one episode of the Spider-Man animated series from the 90s.
Yes.
The Neogenic Nightmare Chapter 9, Blake the Vampire Hunter.
Yeah, it was not good.
That was not good either. Speaking of not good, Blade the series, this was in 2006. Live action series aired on Spike TV, starred rapper/actor Kirk
Sticky Fingers
Jones, and he played Blade. So I will always remember this because it was it might have been 2005, or maybe it was 2006 when we went to Wizard World Chicago.
Yeah.
And they had a wrestling display in the front, but they had an incredibly large display for Blade, and they were promoting it like crazy to get a lot of fanfare, a lot of interest. And in a Wizard World event at any convention, that makes sense. Those are the people that are going to watch the show, and then you watch the show.
Yeah, listen, I think the casting of him was horrible. I do think there was some grumblings about that. I do think that there was talk that they were trying to get somebody else to play Blade, thinking they were trying to get Michael Jai White, as everybody knows Black Dynamite. I think they were trying to get him. He turned him down because he probably wanted a little bit more money, so they went with Sticky Fingers, which was...
And remember, he did Spawn.
He did Spawn, too, so I think that's what it was... that's where they wanted to go with it, and I would have been really happy with Michael Jai White, but I think he was way out of Spike TV's price range, so they went with Sticky Fingers.
Would you see him as Blade in a Netflix series?
I have no problem with Michael Jai White as
Do you
Blade.
think he would fit with all these actors, but the characters?
I don't think Marvel would pick him to be. Marvel has a very unique style of the characters and the actors that they want for their projects, TV. If you look at some of the people they pick, it's nobody would have been. If you look at Charlie Cox for Daredevil, and I forget her name for Jessica Jones.
Danny Rand for Iron Fist?
Yeah.
From Game of Thrones. But even then, I mean, he's like
a third, fourth, fifth, ninth character in Game of Thrones, so he's not like a major character. Michael Jai White has a little bit of a name and presence out there, so I don't think they would cast him. It would be somebody that is somebody somewhere on a TV show, probably an HBO TV show, because they love HBO actors.
That is true.
It's probably somebody on an HBO TV show who we kind of like. He kind of plays a pretty small character. He probably somebody who's like, hey, this guy's... If he cast him, you'd be like, okay, I can live with that. It'll be somebody on an HBO TV show that we kind of bypass, and he'll be the guy who plays the next Blade. It'll be somebody a little younger, probably about in the 30s.
Depend too what kind of Blade they want. Do they want the martial arts heavy Blade?
Yeah.
Do they want a more investigative type Blade, but more like the Vampire Hunter, someone that's more like vampire lore? So they're not using the wire works, martial art ninja type moves. This is more of a more of a hunter type of thing.
If you look at what they've done with the cast of the shows they have right now, even like Luke Cage and Jessica Jones shows, they went and got people who had some kind of a charisma, some kind of personality. And like I said, I love Wesley Snipes, but I think he did a great job, but I think he did a better job. His physical presence and his body language would help form the character Blade. I think if they cast a new Blade for Netflix shows, I think they'll probably get somebody who they feel that maybe can have a little bit more range and do a little bit more emotion. They may get more into whole Blade's background.
And they'd have to, because I mean, if you're talking about 10 to 12 episodes, it's not 2 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking like 12 to 14 hours worth of TV. You have time to explore his past.
Yeah.
who he is, and that means you need an actor that can do that and can do it well, because they've done a pretty good job so far with the Netflix series, just like they've done with the cinematic universe and casting.
Going back to the House of Catan, the other Blade show, actually,
So the Blade series,
the Blade TV series.
Yes.
I didn't actually think that was a horrible show. I thought it was at the time, it was a decent show for what its time. I mean, compared to the shows now, it's a joke. But back then, I didn't think it had a good premise with the vampires having a sort of vampire war with each other, and Blade sort of trying to figure out, does he need to get involved in this war, or does he just let both of them kill each other and just wipe each other out, or does he get involved and try to stop them? It was kind of interesting because it was the purebloods against the transformed, and it was an interesting story from what it was. It just had that TV show, that cheap type of TV show budget that really didn't come across.
Wasn't it around the same time as the Witchblade TV series?
Yeah,
and it felt that kind of.
And Spike TV had less money than TNT for the Witchblade TV series. Another show that had some potential. It wasn't really bad, but it was. I picked it up on DVD, so that should tell you what I thought about the show. I actually thought the show wasn't too bad, and it ended on a cliffhanger, so it really disappointed me.
There you go. So speaking of DVDs, do you have this one, the Blade animated series that was back in 2011 by Madhouse?
Yes, I have the Blade animated series on from Madhouse. It was one.
I have not seen it.
It was good for what it was. Madhouse does the animation, of course, is Madhouse. Yeah. Madhouse animation is spectacular. The story was a little more spiritual than you would like for a Blade TV show, but it was pretty decent. Those Marvel did commission Madhouse do some of the animated shows, and some of them were hits. Some of the Wolverine standalone show was a horrible one. The Blade one was actually pretty decent, and I actually picked it up. And if you're a fan of Blade, I recommend picking it up if it's for $6-7 online or somewhere. It was pretty decent. The animation, I forget who they got for the voice actor for it.
The English version was Harold Perrineau. He was in Lost.
That's what it was. Yes, that's the actor.
He's been in quite a few.
He was in Matrix. Yes. That's
Matrix.
That's the guy. Yeah. He actually did a good job. He was a very solid Blade. He had the cool, badass sound, but he also had the presence of an actor, presence of a character. I'm saying he was a full-fledged character. So he was pretty cool. It was a decent little 10 episodes, I believe, for this series. 13 episodes for the series. It was actually pretty good.
So much more animated appearances for Blade, because then he appeared in the Ultimate Spider-Man show Blade and Howling Commandos when he was voiced by Terry Crews. I think that was like their Halloween 2-part special episode, right? With like the Frankenstein creature and a few others, the werewolf by night. You got it. And he also appeared in Hulk and the Agents of Smash in the episode Hulking Commandos. Terry Crews again with the voice, and he's again one of the member of the Howling Commandos. So it's not like Marvel has forgotten about him.
No.
But then again, as they've kind of reinvented themselves from Marvel to now, I guess, Marvel Entertainment, it's become a different thing. They've matured, but Blade seems to always be kind of like in the conversation.
So yeah, I mean, those two appearances of Blade in the Spider-Man show was actually pretty cool. Terry Crews did actually a pretty good job being cool as well, because everybody knows Terry Crews. He has a real fun personality. He did play it dark, but he also played it with a little light. So I think that may be a way that
for a Disney Channel.
Yeah, for a Disney Channel cartoon show, it was actually pretty fun portrayal of Blade.
So hopefully, if this is your first time looking at Blade, maybe you have a different perspective. I know, just kind of doing the research for this episode, I mean, I saw Blade, like I said, that opening night, I thought it was pretty interesting. It made a difference with you, Dre, because, I mean, the Daywalker's been with you for a long time. So, if you haven't seen Blade in a while, well worth popping it into your DVD, Blu-ray player and watching it. That's not to say you have to watch Blade 2 and 3, but just watch Blade 1 as just kind of like a moment in time. 1998, before Iron Man, before Avengers, before the Infinity War, before
Justice League,
before any of the stuff that's just kind of come upon us and his fanboys. It's great, but just take a step back, take a little 1998 trip in time, and check it out. So, well worth it.
I think Blade deserves a place on the mantle of superhero movies as the first one to get it right, the first R-rated movie to get it right, the first movie with a lead African-American character as a superhero to get it right. The first one is to flip the genres as far as action and supernatural to get that right. It really deserves to get a lot more credit than it does. I think Marvel is very protective of the character, which I really like. They really were happy when they got the rights back to the character. They understand what the character means to a lot of people out there. So I think that going forward, I think Blade as time went on, Blade has earned a right to be a flagship character for Marvel Studios, and it stood the test of time. If you haven't checked it out, it's definitely a movie that is worth checking out. It still holds up today. It still holds up today as a solid action movie.